Okay. So this is my presentation.
Okay.
Okay. This is my presentation on basically where I've been, because you guys haven't seen me in class for a while, like 3.5 months. So yeah, this is what I've been up to. My South American adventure. Okay, so I did this program called the Traveling School, which is basically an all-girls high school study abroad program. It was me and 16 other teenage girls and 5 teachers, which is really cool. And it takes us overseas. We're all 15 to 18 years old, and it's basically trying to redefine what high school is and basically our way of thinking, the way that we learn. It started 14 years ago. We were in the 23rd semester. And then that's a picture of our schedule one day. As you can see, it's very packed. It started at 7:15. It's all in Spanish, and we go until like 10 at night with classes and packing and occasional free time. Tiempo libre. And so, experiential education is basically the philosophy that the traveling school tries to embody. It describes the process between the teacher and a student that infuses direct experience with the learning environment and content. So we lived on a boat in the Galapagos, so you can see them all working on science and Spanish projects. My friend Erin is working on her history at Machu Picchu, and Hannah working on her Spanish project, science project in the Galapagos. Okay, so we started out in Quito, Ecuador, which is right there. This is a map of South America, and then basically we went down into Bolivia. And we traveled by planes, trains, automobiles, cars with people we didn't really know that well, that sort of thing. Okay, so first place, Ecuador. These are some pictures. This is in the highlands, the cloud forest. At first we went to Quito, which is the capital city. And then immediately we drove to this little village called Cayambe, and we stayed in this 500-year-old hacienda, which was really cool. And then we did homestays in a little indigenous village in Albolonga. And then we stayed in Otavalo, which is this city that's off of a mountain, and it's known for its markets. And then we stayed in the cloud forest right here, in a town called Uguia. And then we went to the Amazon. And then the Galapagos, which is right in the middle. Okay, so one of the first things we did was we took a trip to the equator. This is right in the middle of the world. It's called Mitad del Mundo, that's middle of the world in Spanish. And they decided that they wanted to show us this new perspective that they had taken on. They were talking about how the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west, and how our global perspective is kind of off. So if we change our perspective of the world, it's more like this, because that's the way that it orbits, like this. And so they had an idea that the world's powers were always on the top. So that's why they thought it was important to change its perspective and see the world in a new light. Okay, so within about a week of going there, I did a homestay. When I was very new with Spanish, and with a lady whose second language was also Spanish, because she spoke Quechua, which is one of the indigenous languages in Ecuador. So I stayed with this woman named Dionisia, who had grown up in the village. Her husband works in the capital city that we flew into, so she lived by herself for most of the time. She has 2 teenage daughters. Both of them are married. One of them is 18 with a 4-year-old son. So it's very different. She lives in a small house on a property that has cows, alpacas, guinea pigs, dogs, cats, and every single morning I woke up to roosters. And then we slept in sleeping bags on the upper floor. Okay, so what I learned from this lady in the village that I stayed in. This is one of the kids. This is what it looked like. It was in this valley in Ecuador. It was really pretty. And that's her dressing up one of my homestay partners, Charlotte, in the indigenous clothing of the town. So my homestay mother loved potatoes. Potatoes is very popular in South America. It's one of like the biggest crops. And I remember I had a travel journalism assignment that was like, make observations of the town that you're in. And I remember one of my observations was potatoes for every meal. My teacher was like, Courtney, you should not be making generalizations. You know better than that. And I was like, no, it's not a generalization. And potatoes for every meal. Bonita is the Spanish word for pretty. So at this point, I had only really been taking Spanish for like a week, so I was very new to it. So when she was dressing us up in these clothes, we felt kind of silly. She kept being like, bonita, bonita. And we were like, what does that mean? And she was like, oh, that's just the word for pretty, which was really nice. Okay, so during my homestays, I found that getting sick away from home is really depressing, but it can be empowering too. I remember talking about this with my teacher because I got pink eye, I had a stomach infection, and I had the common cold all at once. And so that was very frustrating, especially when you're in someone else's home. And I was like, I wish I could just go home for like 3 days and then come back. And she was like, yeah, but the cool thing about getting sick away from home is that it really teaches you that you can do this and that you can get over this by yourself. You don't need all those comforts of home that you think you need. And at the same time, it does make you appreciate what you have at home. And you can connect to other individuals despite language barriers. So, like I said, I had only been taking Spanish for about a week at this point. This is one of the little girls in the village. She spoke both Quechua and Spanish, but she spoke like no English. And so at that point, I had just learned numbers. So basically, the only way we interacted was counting my bracelets over and over. Uno, dos, tres, cuatro. I had a lot of bracelets, so it was like 10 bracelets on each wrist at that point. So it went on for a while, and then we would just do it over and over, but it was so fun. She was like cuddling up to me. I felt like I made a connection with her, even though I couldn't really talk to her, tell her where I was from, and she couldn't really tell me where she was from, even though I knew. Okay. A big thing we learned about when we were in the Amazon is the oil exploitation. I'm going to read something from a website called Amazon Watch about what some of the different oil companies have done in the Amazon. While drilling in the Ecuadorian Amazon from 1964 to 1990, Texaco, which merged with Chevron in 2001, deliberately dumped more than 18 billion gallons of toxic wastewater, spilled roughly 17 million gallons of crude oil, and left hazardous waste in hundreds of open pits dug out of the forest floor. To save money, Texaco chose to use environmental practices that were obsolete, did not meet industry standards, and were illegal in Ecuador and the United States. The result was, and continues to be, one of the worst environmental disasters on the planet. Contamination of soil, groundwater, and surface streams has caused local indigenous people to suffer a wave of mouth, stomach, and uterine cancer, birth defects, and spontaneous miscarriages. Chevron has never cleaned up the mess it inherited, and its oil wastes continue to poison the rainforest ecosystem. Today, Chevron is a corporate criminal on the run. It has been found guilty by Ecuadorian courts in order to pay $9.5 billion. The company is now running from an international legal dragnet to force the company to pay for the vast task of cleanup and remediation of the Ecuadorian Amazon jungle. The Ecuadorians have filed lawsuits in Canada and Brazil to seek seizure of Chevron's assets for this purpose, and more lawsuits in other nations are expected soon. Pretty horrible. Okay, so here's a trailer for a movie. It's a documentary made about the court cases that Chevron had to face in Ecuador. Does anyone have any questions? Is it? Yeah, it's from the Amazon. It was really cool, actually. It was, oh yeah, Serena.
What was the really old thing that you said you stayed in Ecuador?
Oh, a hacienda.
What is that?
It's like, it's where like people would have like patrons. It was kind of like that old feudal system. So there would be like a man who was in charge, and then he like had all these indigenous people working under him in the hacienda, like with cows or like grains or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, I bought this necklace in the Amazon, and it was really cool. It was like this woman cooperation thing, and these women had been abused by their husbands, so they all went together and decided that they were gonna make their own money for their families. So they decided to make this jewelry, so I bought it at the store, and they all had labels on them of the women who made them, so the money went directly to them. So that was great. It's all on Amazon Yankees. Okay, this documentary.
Turn the volume up, Court.
Oh yeah. I think it's on. Or how do I turn it on?
Hit escape.
Okay.
Go to the bottom right.
Right here?
Yep, raise her up.
Oh, here.
Yeah. Oh. Whoa.
Volume.
Lo que era antes un
What was
paraíso,
once paradise
al momento
now has just been left in destruction.
The total area in which Texaco polluted is about the size of the state of Rhode Island. We are suing for environmental cleanup.
The plaintiff's accusation is defamatory and not true. It's just false and wrong.
es que hoy decenas de hombres y mujeres están padeciendo cáncer y están muriendo en la actualidad.
Chevron takes those kinds of allegations very seriously. There's absolutely no evidence that there's an increase in cancer.
Chevron is fighting the claim and the men who they say have made up their story for their own financial gain.
The analysis of our water and soil samples have been proving that they're guilty of massive contamination.
Esto no es contaminación, esto es una explotación industrial permitida por la ley.
So we're going down to have a little chat with the judge today. This is something you would never do in the United States. But Ecuador, you know, this is how the game is played. It's dirty. People are fed up with corruption. They're fed up with foreign oil companies. They're just tired.
There is the cancer in the liver. These people have been systematically poisoned.
We've sampled every stream, and it has nothing to do with oil. It has to do with poor sanitation.
This is about some of the most marginalized people on earth. Fighting one of the most powerful companies in the world.
Texaco hizo cualquier barbaridad de cosas. Texaco responde por él.
When you look at the science, they cannot really prove their case.
In fact, we're having a trial. It's a miracle. It's a huge victory.
Yes.
Is that this fall? Or is that an older Sundance sign?
Oh, this?
Yes.
I believe it was a few years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
2000.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, okay, so that was all that we did in Ecuador. I mean, that wasn't all of it. That was just a couple lessons I learned. At the beginning was no review, but. And then we traveled to Peru. And so those are just some pictures. That was at the top of the pass in the Cordillera Blanca. That was a shaman giving us a blessing before we did a hike. That was at Machu Picchu. That was in the Cordillera Blanca, and that was in the Cordillera Negra, which are the different mountain ranges. Okay, so we started in Huaraz, which is right at the base of here. That's basically where we stayed because we were doing the Santa Cruz trek. So we decided that was like our base camp basically. And then Cordillera Blanca, which is where our trek was. It was for 6 days with like a giant backpack on, which was very exhausting, but it was really rewarding. And then, oops, it's missing, I believe, Lima, but then we went to Cusco, which is, do you know where Machu Picchu is? That's Machu Picchu. And it's like the city underneath Machu Picchu. I mean, actually, it's higher than Machu Picchu, but it's where you take off to get to Machu Picchu. That's the town right underneath Machu Picchu. It's a lot smaller. It's kind of a tourist town, Aguascalientes, which means hot water. And then we went to Puno, which is a town right on Lake Titicaca. And so I feel like I learned a lot from the physical challenges. I didn't really know how to do any of the sort of physical stuff that I learned how to do during my trip. I learned how to backpack, I learned how to mountaineer, and I snorkeled a lot, which was surprisingly exhausting. And I learned to appreciate what my body can do rather than what it can't do, because I felt like that was a big thing for me. We were at really high altitude, and I have asthma, so it was really hard to breathe. Like, it was like every bit of air, the air was so thin. It was like you had to take so many breaths just to get the amount of oxygen you would get with one breath here. And I actually hiked up a 15,000-foot pass, which was really crazy with that size of a backpack on. And I learned a ton of mountaineering, but I'll talk more about that later. Okay. A big lesson that my teachers wanted us to learn was charity versus solidarity. Charity is defined as voluntary giving of help, and solidarity is the unity or agreement of action. So basically that idea that charity is one person giving to another, kind of perpetuating this system that one person is superior to the other, whereas solidarity is more about two people coming together and learning to help each other. And then there's a quote, "I don't believe in charity, I believe in solidarity. Charity is so vertical, it goes from the top to bottom. Solidarity is horizontal, it respects the other person, and I have a lot to learn from the other person." Okay. And then I have some pictures. So that was us doing some charity, I guess. And we were helping with the potatoes. I don't really know how much we actually helped, but it was fun. And then that was afterwards, they taught us how to spin wool to make different sweaters and stuff, like the one I'm wearing. Okay. And then after Ecuador and Peru, we moved to Bolivia. And we didn't go to as many places in Bolivia. We spent a month and a half in Ecuador. We spent about a month in Peru, and then the last little bit was in Bolivia. So we went to Copacabana, which is right on Lake Titicaca as well. That's Copacabana. And then we went to La Paz, which is basically at the base of a mountain. And then base camp of Mount Tarija. And then this is our guides on Mount Tarija, and then that's a couple people climbing it. Okay, so climbing the mountain, I definitely learned a lot. A big thing that our teachers wanted to stress to us before we decided that we were going to take on this huge task was for us to know that it's not about summiting the mountain, because that's not possible for everyone. Like a little less than half the girls summited. This quote is, "The summit is for the ego, the journey is for the soul." So that idea that summiting isn't really going to help you in the long term. It's just making you feel better about yourself, getting to that top. And then the journey is what really, how you learn. We actually got jackets made of that in Spanish. El cumbre es para el ego, el viaje es para el espíritu. And then this is also from the article that got that quote. "A study on mountain climbers showed that self-esteem in the participants that did not reach the peak improved more than that of the others." It's not what you would say. Interesting. Okay. And so this is the mountain we climbed. So yeah, that's Mount Tarija right there. And then that's us with all of our mountaineering gear. And I was really glad I had heard that quote before, because when I was on the mountain, I actually had an asthma attack, which was very scary. And so it was nice to me to know that I didn't have to make it to the top to feel like I accomplished something. Okay. Any questions? This spot? Yes.
Did you make it to the top?
I didn't. I had an asthma attack about
I didn't know if the asthma attack stopped. I don't know. I did not understand.
Yeah.
They were like, you probably shouldn't keep going up when you can't breathe. I was like, yeah, that makes sense.
Congrats.
Thank you.
She was, what, about 18,000 feet right there, though the
Yeah.
oxygen is very thin.
Yeah, it was really tall. Oh yeah. My dad actually had this idea to explain how high it is. So these are the highest buildings in the world. and then showing like the altitude we're at there. It was about 18,000. That's like the tallest building in the world in scale to the mountain.
A lot higher.
Okay, I did a little section since we're women's studies on the women of Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. These are women who were working with potatoes in Peru. These are women in Bolivia. They all like to carry their babies like this. And then these are some women in Ecuador, or a woman and her child. And we read this book called The Queen of Water. It was really interesting. Okay, I'll read the description. Laura Rousseau tells the story of her co-author Maria Virginia Fernando and wrote The Queen of Water. Maria is a young woman from Ecuador who was born as an indigenous girl. At the age of 7, Maria was taken from her small Quechua family by a wealthy Spanish family. For a decade, she was forced to be their servant. Maria eventually escapes and returns to her family as a teenager, forever changed. After losing her native tongue and maturing in the Spanish culture, Maria is caught between the world that she was born into and the world that she was forced into. And so the cool thing about reading this was probably the fact that not only were we staying with an indigenous family when we were reading it, so we were reading all about their culture and how the Spanish came to South America and they kind of took over and they were the wealthier class. And so for a period of time, they were kidnapping little indigenous girls and forcing them to be their servants. And it's really horrible because this is just one of many stories. But what was really cool was we got to meet her. So she gave us a presentation and was talking about everything that her experiences had taught her. So I have some Maria Virginia Fernando quotes. Very inspirational. Read them. Believe in yourself, believe in your dreams. Querer es poder, which is to want to, is to be able to. In order to respect others, you need to meet your own needs first. Appreciate what you have now. I decided to look to the front and not to the back. And like to the family who had like kidnapped her and abused her and had been so horrible to her, she said that she had to forgive them before she could move on with her life, which I thought was really amazing. Okay. And then I have some stuff on economics, which is really fun. I love economics now. Okay. So this is, I have a little video on consumerism. Since consumerism is so big in this country.
And that brings
There you go. It's about 6 minutes.
us to the golden arrow of consumption. This is the heart of the system, the engine that drives it. It is so important that protecting this arrow has become the top priority for both of these guys. That's why after 9/11, when our country was in shock and President Bush could have suggested any number of appropriate things, to grieve, to pray, to hope. No, he said to shop, to shop. We have become a nation of consumers. Our primary identity has become that of being consumers, not mothers, teachers, farmers, but consumers. The primary way that our value is measured and demonstrated is by how much we contribute to this arrow, how much we consume. And do we? We shop and shop and shop, keep the materials flowing, and flow they do. Guess what percentage of total materials flow through this system is still in product or use 6 months after the date of sale in North America? 50%? 20? No, 1%. 1. In other words, 99% of the stuff we harvest, mine, process, transport, 99% of the stuff we run through the system is trashed within 6 months. Now, how can we run a planet with that level of materials throughput? It wasn't always like this. The average US person now consumes twice as much as they did 50 years ago. Ask your grandma. In her day, stewardship and resourcefulness and thrift were valued. So how did this happen? Well, it didn't just happen. It was designed. Shortly after World War II, these guys were figuring out how to ramp up the economy. Retailing analyst Victor Lebeau articulated the solution that's become the norm for the whole system. He said, our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, replaced, and discarded at an ever-accelerating rate. President Eisenhower's Council of Economic Advisors chairman said that the American economy's ultimate purpose is to produce more consumer goods. More consumer goods? Our ultimate purpose? Not provide health care or education or safe transportation or sustainability or justice? Consumer goods? How did they get us to jump on board this program so enthusiastically? Well, two of their most effective strategies are planned obsolescence and perceived obsolescence. Planned obsolescence is another word for designed for the dump. It means they actually make stuff to be useless as quickly as possible, so we'll chuck it and buy a new one. It's obvious with things like plastic bags and coffee cups, but now it's even big stuff. Mops, DVDs, cameras, barbecues, even everything. Even computers. Have you noticed that when you buy a computer now, the technology is changing so fast that in just a couple of years, it's actually an impediment to communication? I was curious about this, so I opened up a big desktop computer to see what was inside. And I found out that the piece that changes each year is just a tiny little piece in the corner. But you can't just change that one piece because each new version is a different shape. So you gotta chuck the whole thing and buy a new one. So I was reading industrial design journals from the 1950s when planned obsolescence was really catching on. These designers are so open about it. They actually discuss how fast can they make stuff break that still leaves the consumer having enough faith in the product to go out and buy another one. It was so intentional. But stuff cannot break fast enough to keep this arrow afloat. So there's also perceived obsolescence. Now, perceived obsolescence convinces us to throw away stuff that is still perfectly useful. How do they do that? Well, they change the way the stuff looks. So if you bought your stuff a couple of years ago, everyone can tell that you haven't contributed to this arrow recently. And since the way we demonstrate our value is contributing to this arrow, it can be embarrassing. Like, I've had the same fat white computer monitor on my desk for 5 years. My coworker just got a new computer. She has a flat, shiny, sleek monitor. It matches her computer, it matches her phone, even her pen stand. She looks like she's driving in Spaceship Central, and I look like I'm on a washing machine on my desk. Fashion is another prime example of this. Have you ever wondered why women's shoe heels go from fat one year to skinny the next to fat to skinny? It's not because there's some debate about which heel structure is the most healthy for women's feet. It's because wearing fat heels in a skinny heel year shows everybody that you haven't contributed to that arrow as recently, so you're not as valuable as that person in skinny heels next to you, or more likely in some ad. It's to keep us buying new shoes. Advertisements and media in general plays a big role in this. Each of us in the US is targeted with over 3,000 advertisements a day. We see more advertisements in 1 year than people 50 years ago saw in a lifetime. And if you think about it, what's the point of an ad except to make us unhappy with what we have? So 3,000 times a day, we're told our hair is wrong, our skin is wrong, our clothes are wrong, our furniture is wrong, our car is wrong, we are wrong, but it can all be made right if we just go shopping. Media also helps by hiding all of this and all of this. So the only part of the materials economy we see is the shopping. The extraction, production, and disposal all happens outside of our field of vision. So in the US, we have more stuff than ever before, but polls show that our national happiness is actually declining. Our national happiness peaked in the 1950s, the same time that this consumption mania exploded. Interesting coincidence. I think I know why. We have more stuff, but we have less time for the things that really make us happy. Friends, family, leisure time. We're working harder than ever. Some analysts say we have less leisure time than any time since feudal society. And do you know what the two main activities are that we do with the scant leisure time we have? Watch TV and shop. In the US, we spend 3 to 4 times as many hours shopping as our counterparts in Europe do. So we're in this ridiculous situation where we go to work, maybe 2 jobs even, and we come home and we're exhausted, so we plop down on our new couch and watch TV, and the commercials tell us, you suck, so you gotta go to the mall to buy something to feel better, and then you gotta go to work more to pay for the stuff you just bought, so you come home and you're more tired, so you sit down and you watch more TV, and it tells you to go to the mall again, and we're on this crazy work, watch, spend treadmill, and we could just stop.
Okay. I thought that video was interesting to watch, considering I'm a consumer. As I live in the US and I shop, and it's really interesting to try to think more about the decisions that we make and try to be like a smart consumer. So I just wanted to talk about economic growth and whether or not it's considered as desirable. So economic growth is the increase in the market value of goods and services produced by an economy over time, often measured as the percent rate or increase in real gross domestic product, or you guys have probably heard GDP for a country. So it's basically like that idea, like, is increasing our economy like a good thing, you know? There's definitely different point of views on the subject. Some people say that raising income allows households to purchase additional medical care, education, and recreation, and it helps generate resources to improve the nation's infrastructure. So what we saw, the shopping, like how George Bush said to go shopping because it'll help the economy, that helps the economy.